Sometimes the deepest love comes in the form of forepaws and a silent promise of forever loyalty. After being separated from the only human he had ever trusted, Max's spirits seemed to break as days turned into weeks of him refusing even a single bite of food, his body growing weaker while his eyes remained fixed on the door his owner had walked through for the last time. The shelter workers tried everything: gourmet treats, hand feeding, even medication, but nothing could heal the hole in Max's heart as he slowly wasted away, a living shadow of the vibrant dog he once was. Before we continue this heartbreaking story of devotion that defied even the basic instinct to survive, if you believe in the unbreakable bond between humans and their loyal companions, please subscribe to our channel now for more stories that prove animals feel love just as deeply as we do. What happened when Max's original owner finally walked through those shelter doors would leave even the most hardened hearts in tears. Max had never known a home without James. For 5 years, their lives had been perfectly intertwined: morning walks around the lake where Max would chase squirrels, while James sipped his coffee, evenings spent on the worn leather couch, where Max's large body would somehow find a way to fit entirely on James's lap despite his shepherd-sized frame. Their bond had been forged through patience and trust after James had rescued Max from a shelter where he'd been taken after his first family abandoned him on the side of a highway. "You and me, buddy," James would say every night as they settled in. "That's all we need." And for Max, those words were the foundation of his world. James was safety. James was home. James was everything. The morning it all changed started like any other. James filled Max's bowl with kibble, scratched behind his ears in that perfect spot that made his back leg thump against the kitchen floor, and grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. "Be good, Max. Back soon," James said. The same words he always spoke before leaving for work. Max settled into his favorite sunny spot by the window to wait for James's return, completely unaware that everything was about to change. When the phone rang hours later in James's empty apartment, Max barked at the answering machine as it recorded the panicked voice of James's sister, Sarah. "James, it's me. Call me as soon as you get this. The hospital called. There's been an accident." Max didn't understand the words, but something about the voice made his ears flatten against his head. He paced the apartment, whining softly as the sun moved across the sky, and James didn't return. By nightfall, his anxiety had grown into full-blown distress. He hadn't been alone this long since James had adopted him. He refused the kibble in his bowl, instead positioning himself by the front door, ears perking up at every footstep in the hallway. It was nearly midnight when a key finally turned in the lock, but the scent wasn't James. Max backed away, hackles raised as Sarah entered, her eyes red and swollen. "Hey Max," she said softly, kneeling down and extending her hand. "Remember me? I'm Sarah, James's sister." Max recognized her after a moment she'd visited several times before, but her presence without James only confused him more. He sniffed her cautiously, then looked past her to the open door, expecting James to follow. "He's not coming, buddy," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Not tonight." The next morning was a blur of activity that Max couldn't comprehend. Sarah packed a bag with his food, his favorite squeaky hamburger toy, and the blue blanket that usually lay across the foot of James's bed. She attached his leash, speaking to him in a gentle voice that did nothing to calm his growing sense that something was terribly wrong. "It's just temporary, Max," she explained as she led him from the apartment. "I can't have dogs in my building. And James is going to be in the hospital for a while." Max didn't know what a hospital was, but he understood they were leaving. James's scent, James's space, everything that represented security in his world. He pulled back on the leash, his nails scraping against the hallway floor as he tried to return to the apartment. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face as she gently tugged him forward. "I'm so sorry." The car ride was tense, with Max panting anxiously in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the passing landscape as they drove farther and farther from home. When they finally stopped, the building before them smelled of disinfectant and other animals of them. The sound of barking echoed from inside, and Max pressed himself against Sarah's legs, trembling. "Riverside Animal Shelter. Read the sign above the entrance. We'll find your forever friend." But Max already had his forever friend. He just didn't know where he was. Inside, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Emma greeted them. Sarah explained the situation in a hushed voice while Max scanned the unfamiliar listings, his anxiety climbing with each passing minute. "My brother's in intensive care after a car accident," Sarah explained, her voice breaking. "They don't know when he'll wake up. And my apartment building has a strict no pets policy. I don't know anyone who can take a dog his size, especially not for what might be ... weeks or months." Emma nodded sympathetically, kneeling to Max's level. "Hey there, handsome," she said softly, offering her hand for him to sniff. "We'll take good care of you until your dad gets better." Max allowed her to touch him, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah, the last connection to James and home. The paperwork took forever: vaccination records, behavioral history, dietary needs. With each form Sarah completed, the reality of what was happening became clearer to Max. It was being left behind. Again, his name is Max. He's 7 years old, and he's been with James for 5 years, Sarah said, her pen hovering over the surrender form. James rescued him from a shelter after his first family abandoned him. He's a good dog, the best, but he's very attached to my brother. Emma nodded, her expression softening further. Separation anxiety. Some, Sarah admitted. James works from home most days, so they're rarely apart. As Sarah knelt to say goodbye, Max finally understood. She was leaving, and he wasn't going with her. He pressed his muzzle against her hand, whining softly, pleadingly. I'll come visit, she promised, wrapping her arms around his neck. And as soon as James is better, he'll come for you, I promise. But Max had heard promises before, from his first family who had sworn he would be their forever dog right before driving him to an unfamiliar place and driving away. While Sarah walked toward the door, Max lunged forward with surprising strength, nearly pulling the leash from Emma's hand. He barked desperately, the sound echoing off the shelter walls as he tried to follow the last person connected to James. Sarah turned back once, her face crumpling, before she hurried through the door and disappeared from sight. That was the moment. Something inside Max seemed to break. His barking stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, mournful whine. His tail, which had always wagged with the enthusiasm of a dog who knew he was loved, hung limp between his legs. It's okay, boy, Emma soothed, gently leading him toward the kennels. You'll be okay. But as Max was led past rows of barking dogs to a small enclosure with a bed, a water bowl, and a food dish, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would be okay again. James was gone. Home was gone. And Max was back where he had sworn. He would never be again alone, unwanted, waiting for someone who might never return. When Emma placed a bowl of kibble in his new enclosure, Max turned away. Food held no interest for a dog whose heart was breaking. Instead, he curled up on the thin bed, his nose pointed toward the shelter entrance, and began the vigil that would continue for days. Then weeks, watching, waiting for the only person who could make his world whole again. The shelter operated on a strict schedule: lights on at 7 a.m., feeding at 8, outdoor time at 10, afternoon walks, evening feeding at 5. Lights dimmed at 9. Emma had explained this routine to Max as she settled him in, speaking in that gentle voice humans use when they think animals understand every word. Max didn't understand the schedule, but he understood captivity. He had been in a shelter before James found him. On that first morning, when Emma arrived with his breakfast, she found the previous day's kibble untouched, the water barely disturbed. Max was exactly where she had left him, curled on the bed, eyes fixed on the door, his body tense with anticipation. Not hungry, handsome, she asked, replacing the old food with fresh. She reached to stroke his head, but Max shifted away, his gaze never leaving the entrance. James will want you healthy when he comes back. At the sound of James's name, Max's ears twitched, but nothing else changed. He didn't approach the food. By the third day, concern had replaced optimism in Emma's voice. Max had taken only a few laps of water and hadn't touched his food at all. When she tried to coax him outside, he went reluctantly, did his business quickly, then dragged her back to his kennel where he could resume his watch. Dr. Miller, Emma called to the shelter veterinarian as he passed. Could you take a look at Max? He's not eating. The vet, a kind-faced man with graying hair, entered Max's kennel carefully. Max allowed the examination, the hands checking his gums, feeling his ribs, testing his reflexes, but remained detached, as if his body were merely a shell while his true self was somewhere else. With James physically, he seems okay, Dr. Miller concluded. His gums are still pink, no fever, good response, but he's already lost some weight. If he doesn't start eating soon, we'll have to consider more aggressive intervention. Emma nodded, her forehead creased with worry. I've tried everything: wet food, treats, even hamburger. He just isn't interested. It's not uncommon, the vet explained. Dogs are deeply emotional creatures. The shelter environment is stressful enough, but factor in sudden separation from his owner, double quotes. He shook his head. Keep trying different foods. Sometimes the novelty can override the depression. But novelty made no difference to Max. Turkey, chicken, expensive canned food, even steak brought from Emma's own dinner, all went untouched. He accepted small sips of water when Emma held the bowl to his muzzle and gently encouraged him. But food remained unappealing to a dog whose appetite had died when his world collapsed. Other staff members tried as well. Marissa, a college student, who volunteered on weekends, sat in Max's kennel for hours, reading aloud from a dog-eared paperback, occasionally offering him treats that remained uneaten. Miguel, one of the kennel attendants, brought his guitar and played quiet songs that made Max's ears twitch but couldn't break through his depression. We could try socializing him with other dogs, suggested Corey, the shelter manager, as they discussed Max's case during a staff meeting at the end of his first week. Sometimes that can snap them out of it. The next day, they introduced Max to Luna, a gentle golden retriever known for her calming effect on anxious dogs. In the shelter's small play yard, Luna approached Max with a wagging tail and playbow. Inviting interaction, Max simply looked through her, past her, his attention fixed on the shelter door as if James might walk through at any moment. After Luna, they tried Diesel, an energetic boxer mix, thinking perhaps a more assertive approach might engage Max. Diesel bounded around Max, barking playfully, even bringing him toys. Max responded by lying down, his head on his paws, shutting out the world that wasn't James. By the end of the second week, Max's condition had deteriorated noticeably. His ribs were becoming visible beneath his once lustrous coat, which now shed excessively and had lost its shine. His eyes, though still fixed vigilantly on the door, had developed a glassy quality that frightened Emma. "We need to try something else," she insisted during an emergency staff meeting. At this rate, she couldn't finish the sentence, her throat tightening with emotion. "We could try a feeding tube, doctor," Miller suggested reluctantly. "It's invasive, but it might be necessary to get nutrients into him while we work on the psychological issues." Emma shook her head. "That's a last resort. There has to be another way." She thought for a moment. "What about James's sister? She'll bring something with James's scent. A t-shirt, a pillowcase, something to comfort him." The call to Sarah was brief but productive. Though she couldn't visit, she was splitting her time between work and the hospital, where James remained unconscious. She agreed to drop off some items from James's apartment. The next morning, Emma arrived at the shelter clutching a plastic bag containing James's unwashed bathrobe, a well-worn t-shirt, and the pillowcase from his bed. As she approached Max's kennel, something in her demeanor must have communicated expectation, because Max raised his head, his nostrils flaring slightly. "I have something for you," Emma said softly, entering his space and kneeling beside him. She pulled out the bathrobe first, holding it toward Max. The change was immediate and heartbreaking. Max lunged forward, burying his nose in the fabric, inhaling deeply. A small whine escaped him as he recognized James's scent. He pawed at the robe, trying to get closer, to surround himself with the essence of his missing person. Emma spread the robe on Max's bed, then added the t-shirt and pillowcase. Max circled 3 times before settling onto this makeshift nest, his body visibly relaxing for the first time since his arrival. "That's it, good boy," Emma whispered, relief washing over her. "He's still with you. See, he hasn't forgotten." Encouraged by this breakthrough, Emma tried again with food, placing a small amount of wet food near Max's nose. He sniffed it briefly, but turned away, still uninterested. Though disappointed, Emma took comfort in the small victory. Max had shown his first emotional response in 2 weeks. It was a start. Sarah called for an update. Corey informed Emma later that day. "Any progress to report?" He responded to James's things. Emma said, "No eating yet, but he seemed present for the first time." "That's something," Corey acknowledged. "Did she have any news about James?" Emma shook her head, still unconscious. "The doctors are concerned about brain swelling. They're not making predictions." That night, Emma stayed late, sitting beside Max's kennel with the lights dimmed, speaking softly to him about James. "I bet he's really something. You're James," she said. "To inspire this kind of loyalty, most dogs adjust after a few days. They get sad, sure, but survival instinct kicks in. Not you though. You're something special, Max." Max's eyes, fixed on her face as she spoke his person's name, seemed more alert than they had been in days. Understanding flickered there, not of her words, but of a recognition that James mattered, that James was everything. "He's fighting to come back to you," Emma continued. "Sarah says he's strong, like you. You need to be strong too, Max. You need to eat, stay healthy for when he comes." Before leaving, Emma tried once more, placing a small piece of chicken directly in front of Max's nose. To her astonishment and relief, after a long moment of consideration, Max's tongue darted out, and he took the morsel. It was the first food he had accepted in 15 days. "Good boy," Emma whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "That's the way." It wasn't much. A single piece of chicken hardly constituted a meal, but as Emma drove home that night, the tiny victory filled her with hope. Max was still in there, still fighting, still waiting. The question remained whether James would return before Max's waiting became too much for his weakened body to bear. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Max. His situation had moved beyond professional concern into something personal, consuming her thoughts even when she was off the clock. That night, after the small breakthrough with the chicken, she found herself researching canine grief on her laptop until well past midnight. "Dogs and the psychology of loss," she typed into the search bar. Page after page of articles, studies, and forum posts filled her screen. She read accounts of dogs who stopped eating after their owners died, who waited at doors or windows for months, who visited graves with uncanny precision. The science was clear. Dogs experienced grief in ways strikingly similar to humans, though filtered through their unique canine understanding of the world. One case study particularly resonated: a German Shepherd in Japan, who had waited at a train station every day for 10 years after his owner's death. "These aren't just habits," the researcher concluded. "These are expressions of emotional bonds that transcend our traditional understanding of animal consciousness." The next morning, Emma arrived at the shelter early, armed with new strategies and a specialist's phone number. Dr. Carter was a veterinary behaviorist who had written extensively about canine grief and separation anxiety. Her consultation fee was steep, but Emma was determined to try everything. The key difference in Max's case, Dr. Carter explained during their phone consultation, is the uncertainty. When an owner dies, dogs eventually process the permanent absence, but when the owner simply disappears from their perspective, they can become locked in a state of anticipatory waiting. "So what can we do?" Emma asked, watching Max through the office window as he lay on James's bathrobe, his eyes still fixed on the entrance. "We need to create stability and positive associations while we wait for resolution," Dr. Carter suggested. "Establish yourself as his temporary person, not replacing his owner, but providing a secure attachment in the interim, and document everything. If this continues much longer, we may need to consider medication." Emma took detailed notes, thanked the specialist, and immediately implemented the suggestions. She rearranged her schedule to spend the first and last hours of each day with Max. She brought her lunch to his kennel, eating while talking to him in a calm, conversational tone. She began reading to him from dog-themed novels, her voice creating a gentle soundtrack to his waiting. The small piece of chicken became 2, then 3. By the end of the 3rd week, Max was accepting about a quarter cup of food daily, nowhere near what a dog his size required, but enough to slow his physical decline. "We're making progress," Emma reported during the weekly staff meeting. "He's eating a little, and his responsiveness has improved." "That's still dangerously inadequate nutrition," Dr. Miller reminded her. "At this rate, he's just prolonging the inevitable. We need to consider more aggressive intervention." Emma's protective instincts flared. "Give us more time. He's beginning to trust me." "Time is the one thing he may not have," the vet countered. "His body is consuming itself to function. Another few weeks like this and organ damage becomes a concern." Reluctantly, Emma agreed to a compromise. Max would receive subcutaneous fluid injections to prevent dehydration, and if he didn't increase his food intake significantly within the next week, they would insert a feeding tube. That afternoon, as Dr. Miller administered the fluids, Max remained stoic, his eyes following Emma as if to confirm that this strange procedure was acceptable. She stroked his head, murmuring reassurances, and was rewarded with the slightest tail movement. Not a wag, exactly, but an acknowledgement of her presence. "You felt that?" Dr. Miller asked, noticing her expression change. Emma nodded. His tail moved just a little, but it's the first time since he arrived. The vet's clinical demeanor softened. "That's significant. Keep doing what you're doing." Encouraged, Emma redoubled her efforts. She arranged for Max to spend time in the shelter office rather than his kennel, creating a bed of James's things beneath her desk where Max could maintain his vigil while being part of the human activity around him. "Who's this handsome boy?" asked a woman who had come to adopt a cat, kneeling to offer Max her hand. "This is Max," Emma explained. "He's not up for adoption. We're just fostering him until his owner recovers from an accident." The woman's expression softened with understanding. "He looks so sad. He misses his person," Emma said simply. Word of Max's situation spread among shelter visitors. People began bringing special treats, homemade chicken, jerky, gourmet dog biscuits, even freshly cooked meals. Max accepted these offerings with increasing, though still minimal, interest. Each morsel consumed felt like a victory in the quiet battle for his survival. Sarah called weekly for updates, though she still couldn't visit. "James showed some response yesterday," she reported one afternoon, her voice tentatively hopeful. "The doctors say he squeezed their hand on command. It's small, but it's something." Emma shared this news with Max, holding his face gently between her hands, making sure he was looking at her. "James is fighting," she told him. "He's trying to come back to you. You need to keep fighting too." That night, Max ate half a cup of food, his largest meal since arriving at the shelter. Emma texted Sarah immediately. "Breakthrough with Max. Biggest meal yet. Keep talking to James about him maybe. On some level, he's responding to that too." The next day, Emma brought something new to the shelter, a small digital recorder. "I've been reading about memory and association in dogs," she explained to Corey. "I thought maybe if Sarah could record herself talking about James and Max, using familiar phrases they might have heard at home, it could help." Sarah agreed immediately, emailing an audio file that evening. Emma played it for Max the next morning, watching carefully for his reaction. "Hey Max," Sarah's voice emerged from the small speaker. "James says to be a good boy. He says to eat your dinner and take your walks. He says to remember that you're the best dog in the whole world, and he's coming home to you as soon as he can." Max's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. His ears, which had been half flattened in his now chronic state of depression, perked forward. His head tilted slightly, that characteristic canine expression of interest. When the recording mentioned James coming home, Max stood up and approached the device, sniffing it curiously. "Good boy," Emma encouraged, offering a piece of chicken which Max accepted without hesitation. "See, James is thinking about you." Over the next few days, Emma played the recording regularly, always following it with food and gentle affirmation. Max's eating gradually increased to nearly half his normal diet, still concerning, but no longer immediately life-threatening. Dr. Miller, examining Max at the 1-month mark, noted modest improvement. His weight has stabilized, and his hydration is better. Still not ideal, but he's no longer in immediate danger, so we can hold off on the feeding tube. Emma asked hopefully. The vet nodded. For now, whatever you're doing, keep it up. What Emma was doing, beyond the practical interventions, was something more intuitive. She was honoring Max's grief while gently encouraging his will to survive. She never pretended James didn't matter or that Max should get over it. Instead, she acknowledged the validity of his waiting, his loyalty, while creating space for him to accept care in the interim. You know, she told Max one evening as she prepared to leave, I think James must be incredible to deserve love like yours. I hope I get to meet him someday. Max, curled on his bed of James's clothes, met her eyes briefly before returning his gaze to the door. In that momentary connection, Emma sensed not just animal instinct but something deeper, a conscious choice to endure, to wait, to believe in a reunion that existed only as possibility. As she drove home that night, Emma realized that Max was teaching her something profound about love, that its purest form might be this patient, unwavering faith in someone's return, this willingness to suffer rather than abandon hope. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure, and she found herself praying that such extraordinary loyalty would be rewarded. What she couldn't know was that 40 miles away, in a hospital room bathed in the blue glow of monitoring equipment, James Bennett had just opened his eyes for the first time in 32 days. His first coherent word, a raspy, urgent question. Max. Darkness, floating. Fragments of sound, beeping machines, murmured voices, squeaking shoes on linoleum. This had been James's world for over a month, though time held no meaning in the liminal space between consciousness and oblivion. Occasionally, a familiar voice would pierce the fog. Zara, his sister, speaking words he couldn't quite grasp. Something about waiting, about Max, about holding on. Max? The name triggered something in CERN, urgency, a tugging at the edges of his awareness. Max needed him. Max was waiting. The first time James opened his eyes, the fluorescent ceiling lights sent shards of pain through his skull. He squeezed them shut immediately, but not before a flurry of activity erupted around him, monitors beeping, faster voices calling out, hands touching his arm, his face. James, James, can you hear me? A woman's voice, professional but kind. Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. He managed a weak pressure against the fingers holding his. More excitement, more voices. He's responding. Page, Dr. Mercer, Mr. Bennett. James, don't try to talk yet. You're in the hospital. You've been in an accident. But talking was exactly what James needed to do. He forced his eyes open again, wincing against the light, and formed his lips around the only word that mattered. Max. Confusion on the nurse's face. Max, is that someone we should call? Sarah's voice suddenly there. His dog. He's asking about his dog. Then, closer, her hand replacing the nurse's. James, it's Sarah. Max is okay. He's safe. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by doubt. Something in Sarah's voice didn't sound right. The effort of consciousness became too much, and darkness reclaimed him. The next time he surfaced, the room was dimmer, more manageable. Sarah was there, dozing in a chair beside his bed. Machines still beeped, but quieter now. And the fourth line trailed from his arm, and he became aware of a dull, throbbing pain throughout his body. Sarah, he managed, his voice a raspy whisper. She startled awake, joy and disbelief flooding her face. James, you're back, really back. This time, what happened? He asked. Sarah moved closer, taking his hand. You were in an accident. A truck ran a red light, hit your car on the driver's side. You've been in a coma for 34 days. The information was too enormous to process. A month of his life, gone. He focused on what mattered. Max? He asked again. Sarah's expression faltered slightly. He's at Riverside Shelter. My building doesn't allow shelter. James interrupted, alarm sharpening his voice. Why a shelter? Why not with you? Or Mike? Or everyone tried? Sarah assured him quickly. Mike's traveling for work, Lisa's baby is allergic, and my building has that strict no pets policy. The shelter was the only option, but he's getting good care, I promise. James closed his eyes, imagining Max in a kennel, confused, abandoned, waiting. Max, who had already been betrayed once before James adopted him. Max, who still sometimes woke from nightmares whimpering, only settling when James placed a reassuring hand on his flank. How is he? James asked, though he feared the answer. Sarah hesitated just long enough for James to know it wasn't good. He's having a hard time adjusting. There's a staff member, Emma, who's taken a special interest in him. She updates me regularly. What aren't you telling me? James pressed, fighting against the fatigue that already threatened to pull him back under Sarah's side. He's not eating well. He misses you, James, but Emma's making progress with him. He's stable. Stable. The clinical understatement sent a surge of panic through James. He tried to sit up, only to be halted by pain and the alarming realization that his body wouldn't cooperate. I need to see him, he insisted as Sarah gently pressed him back against the pillows. You need to heal, she countered. Max will be there when you're better. Focus on getting well enough to go home to him. The conversation depleted what little energy James had. He drifted off again, his dreams filled with images of Max waiting by the door of their apartment, growing thinner, more despondent with each passing day. The next morning brought doctors, tests, evaluations. James learned the extent of his brain injury, broken ribs, fractured femur, internal bleeding that had required emergency surgery. The fact that he was alive was described as remarkable. The fact that he had regained consciousness with his cognitive functions intact was extraordinary. But all James could think about was Max. "When can I leave?" he asked Dr. Mercer, the neurologist leading his care team. The doctor's expression was compassionate but firm. "Not for some time. Mr. Bennett, your brain is still healing. You'll need extensive physical therapy to regain mobility. We're looking at weeks, possibly months, of rehabilitation." "But my dog, I understand your concern," Dr. Mercer interrupted gently. "But you can't help your dog if you don't recover properly. Brain injuries are delicate. Pushing too hard too fast can lead to setbacks." Frustrated but too weak to argue, James focused on the only thing he could control: his recovery. Each day became a series of small battles, won or lost. The first time he sat up unassisted. The first steps with a walker, his broken leg still immobilized in a cast. Cognitive exercises that left him exhausted but determined. Throughout it all, Max remained. His motivation, his fixed point. He asked Sarah for updates constantly. Clinging to any positive development, Max accepting food from Emma's hand. Max responding to the recording of Sarah's voice. Max spending time in the shelter office rather than his kennel. "Can you bring him here?" James asked repeatedly. "Just for a visit?" But the hospital's policy was firm: only service animals were permitted, and even those under strictly controlled circumstances. COVID protocols added another layer of restriction. No exceptions could be made, not even for a patient whose recovery seemed linked to reunion with his dog. "What about video?" James suggested. Could Sarah take video of Max at the shelter? This request, at least, could be accommodated. The following day, Sarah arrived with her tablet, showing James footage she'd recorded during her first visit to Max. The images were simultaneously comforting and devastating. Max, noticeably thinner, lying on what James recognized as his bathrobe, his eyes fixed on the shelter entrance with an expression of patient expectation that broke James's heart. "He's waiting for me," James whispered, touching the screen as if he could reach through it to stroke Max's fur. "He is," Sarah agreed, "which is why you need to get better. He needs you whole." James. That night, alone in his hospital room, James made a decision. If he couldn't go to Max yet, he would find other ways to bridge the gap. He asked Sarah to bring paper and a pen during her next visit. "What are you writing?" she asked as James laboriously formed words, his fine motor skills still affected by the brain injury. "A letter," he replied, "to Max." Sarah didn't point out that dogs can't read. Instead, she watched as her brother poured his heart onto the page, promising Max he hadn't been abandoned, that he was loved, that they would be reunited. When he finished, James folded the paper and handed it to Sarah. "Ask Emma to read this to him," he instructed, "and put it with my things that he sleeps with." Over the next weeks, as James progressed from walker to crutches, from supervised showers to tentative independence, he wrote to Max daily. The letters became a ritual, a connection to the life waiting beyond the hospital walls. Sometimes he included small tokens: a hospital bracelet carrying his scent, a napkin from his lunch tray, anything that might reassure Max that he still existed, that he was coming back. Physical therapy was grueling, painful, exhausting, often discouraging. There were days when James's body refused to cooperate, when the brain injury manifested in sudden headaches or moments of confusion. On those days, the physical therapist would sometimes find James sitting dejectedly on the edge of the exercise. "Matt, tough day?" she would ask, already knowing the answer. "I need to get home to Max," James would reply, the same determination returning to his voice regardless of setbacks. The therapist, sensing the power of this motivation, incorporated it into his recovery plan. "Let's practice the movements. You'll need to take Max for a walk," she suggested. Or, "This exercise will help you build the strength to lift his food bag." Each task became not just rehabilitation but preparation for reunion. 63 days after the accident, James stood without assistance for the first time, supporting his weight on his healing leg for nearly a minute before carefully sitting down again. When he called Sarah with the news, her voice caught with emotion. "That's amazing, James. I'm so proud of you. Tell Emma," he instructed. "Tell her to let Max know I'm standing up now. I'm coming for him soon." But soon remained frustratingly indefinite. Though James progressed rapidly, his determination impressing even the most seasoned hospital staff, the medical team remained cautious about discharge. Cognitive testing still showed subtle deficits. His balance wasn't fully reliable. The risk of falling, of undoing months of healing, kept him tethered to the rehabilitation facility even as his strength returned. "Patience, Mr. Bennett," Dr. Mercer advised during rounds. "You're making exceptional progress. Don't jeopardize it by rushing." The morning began like any other at Riverside Shelter, the cacophony of barks and meows as animals awakened, the staff arriving with coffee cups and determination, the familiar rhythm of feeding and cleaning that structured each day. Emma arrived early, as had become her habit, stopping first at Max's kennel before even removing her jacket. "Morning, handsome," she called softly as she approached. The sight that greeted her sent ice through her veins. Max lay on his side, his breathing shallow, his eyes open but unfocused. When she called his name again, there was no response, not even the slight tail movement she had come to expect. "Dr. Miller," she shouted, fumbling with the kennel latch. "Emergency in Kennel 12. The veterinarian arrived quickly, medical bag in hand. His expression turned grave as he knelt beside Max, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "He's severely dehydrated," he announced. "His temperature is below normal." "How was he yesterday?" "Quiet but responsive," Emma replied, her voice shaking. "He ate a little chicken from my hand at dinner. Nothing seemed this dramatic." Dr. Miller nodded grimly. "Sometimes they compensate until they can't anymore. He's been running on reserves that have finally depleted. We need to get fluids into him immediately and warm him up." What followed was a blur of activity. Max was carefully transported to the shelter's medical room, placed on a heated pad, and connected to an IV delivering fluids and essential nutrients directly into his bloodstream. He submitted to these interventions with an unsettling passivity, as if his legendary determination had finally exhausted itself. "Should we call Sarah?" Emma asked, stroking Max's head as Dr. Miller adjusted the fluid rate. "Let's stabilize him first," the vet advised. "Give the fluids time to work before we alarm her." But alarm was precisely what Emma felt as she sat beside Max's still form, watching his shallow breathing, willing each rise and fall of his chest to continue. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had been making progress, small halting progress, but progress nonetheless. James's letters, which she faithfully read to Max each day, seemed to comfort him. The recordings of Sarah's voice had stimulated his interest. What had changed? "Fight, Max," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "James is coming. You can't give up now." 2 hours later, Max's condition had improved marginally. His temperature had returned to normal range, and the IV fluids had begun to reduce the dangerous dehydration. But his response to stimuli remained minimal, a slight eye movement when his name was called, nothing more. "He's at a crossroads," Dr. Miller explained to the gathered staff. "Physically, we can support him with fluids and nutrition, but his will to live seems to be fading. In cases like this, the psychological component often determines the outcome more than medical intervention." "What can we do?" Emma asked, desperation edging her voice. Dr. Miller's expression was compassionate but realistic. "Continue what you've been doing, the connection to James, the familiar sense, the personal attention, but prepare yourselves for the possibility that it might not be enough." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the room. If Max continued to decline, humane euthanasia might become the kindest option, a thought so painful that Emma physically recoiled from it. "No," she said firmly, "that's not an option. He's waited this long. We can't give up on him now." Corey placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Nobody's giving up, Emma, but we have a responsibility to consider his quality of life." Emma nodded stiffly, understanding the ethical obligation but rejecting it emotionally. Max wasn't just another shelter case to her anymore. His unfailing loyalty, his patient waiting, had come to represent something profound about love itself, something she couldn't bear to see extinguished. "I need to call Sarah," she said finally. "She needs to know. And maybe James is well enough now for at least a short visit. It might be Max's only chance." The call was difficult, Sarah's distress palpable even through the phone. "The doctors still won't approve James leaving the facility," she explained, her voice breaking. "His balance isn't reliable enough yet. They're afraid he could fall, set back his recovery by months." "Sarah," Emma said gently, "I don't want to alarm you, but Max is reaching a critical point. Is there any way James could appeal the decision? Explain the special circumstances." "He's been trying," Sarah replied, "but medical protocols are strict, especially with brain injuries. Even a supervised visit would require approval from multiple specialists, and they're concerned about the emotional impact if James becomes overwhelmed." The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Emma feeling helpless as she returned to Max's side. The fourth was helping, but his profound lethargy continued, a dog who had given up hope after holding on for so long. "We need to try something else," Emma told Dr. Miller that afternoon. "Something dramatic." The veterinarian raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. What if we bring Max to James? If James can't come here, maybe we could take Max to the hospital, just to the parking lot even. Let them see each other through a window? Something. Anything." Dr. Miller considered this. In Max's current condition, the stress of transport could be risky, but staying here, he left the thought unfinished. Emma's mind raced, searching for alternatives. What about a video call? Technology? Something. It wasn't ideal. Dogs don't generally recognize people on screens, but it was something. Sarah agreed immediately, arranging a time when James would be alone in his room. That evening, Emma sat beside Max's bed in the medical room, holding her tablet at what she hoped was an angle Max could see. When James's face appeared on the screen, Emma felt a surge of shock. She had imagined him from Max's stories and Sarah's, descriptions, but the man before her looked profoundly changed by his ordeal, thinner, with a scar visible along his. Emma hadn't intended to share Max's story beyond the shelter staff. It had been a private journey, an intimate witnessing of loyalty that felt almost sacred. But when local reporter Diane Foster called about doing a feature on long-term shelter residents, Emma found herself mentioning Max. He's not actually available for adoption, she explained after describing his situation, but his story is pretty remarkable. Diane's journalistic instincts immediately engaged. A dog who stopped eating when separated from his owner, and then, the owner checked himself out of rehab to save him. That's not just remarkable, Emma. That's extraordinary. 3 days later, Max and James appeared on the front page of the local section in the Riverside Gazette. The photo, taken in James's apartment, with both still visibly recovering, captured something compelling. James, seated with his walker nearby, Max pressed against his leg, both gazing at the camera with identical expressions of gentle determination. The headline read, "The Weight Dog Refuses Food for Months Until Reunion with Hospitalized Owner." Diane's article told their story with sensitivity and depth, quoting Emma about Max's decline and Dr. Miller about the medical implications of such profound grief. She described James's decision to leave rehabilitation against medical advice, his certainty that Max wouldn't survive much longer without him. The final paragraph noted that both were now recovering at home, supporting each other through their respective healing processes. What happened next surprised everyone. By noon, the shelter's phone was ringing constantly. Emails poured in. The story had been shared thousands of times on social media, with comments ranging from tearful emoji to personal stories of animal devotion. By evening, several national news outlets had picked up the story, expanding its reach exponentially. "This is getting a bit overwhelming," Sarah told Emma when she called. "James's phone won't stop buzzing with notifications. People are finding him on every platform." Emma winced. "I'm so sorry. I should have checked with you before mentioning it to Diane." No, Sarah assured her. "James isn't upset. He's just a bit overwhelmed. But there's something else happening that you should know about." That something else became clear the next morning when Sarah texted Emma a photo of their apartment building entrance. Packages were stacked outside the door: dog beds, premium food, toys, treats, even a custom ramp to help Max navigate the apartment while people keep bringing things, Sarah explained when Emma called. "Complete strangers. They ring the bell, leave gifts, ask if they can help somehow." One woman brought homemade bone broth for Max. A local butcher delivered organic meat. A lot. The community's response continued to build as the story spread. Riverside Pet Supply announced they would provide free food for Max during his recovery. A local veterinary specialist offered complimentary rehabilitation services. Emma's inbox filled with messages from people wanting to contribute to Max's medical expenses, even though the article had made no mention of financial need. "You've become local celebrities," Emma told James during her first professional visit, to check on Max. 3 days after the reunion, "How are you handling it?" James smiled tiredly from his position on the sofa. Max curled beside him. "It's overwhelming, but also heartwarming to know that so many people care." He stroked Max's head gently. "Though I think Max is mostly enjoying the gourmet treats. He's eating better than I ever fed him before." The improvement in Max was already visible, though still underweight. His eyes had regained their alertness, and his coat was beginning to recover its sheen. He followed James constantly, his separation anxiety understandably intensified by their long absence. Even bathroom visits required Max's accompaniment, his anxiety spiking whenever James was out of sight. "That should improve with time and security," Emma assured James. Right now, his world is still re-establishing its foundations. Consistency is key. For James, recovery was more complicated. The premature departure from rehabilitation meant his physical therapy was now conducted at home, with visiting specialists who had to work around his refusal to be separated from Max. His balance remained precarious, his strength limited. But each day brought small improvements, standing a little longer, walking a little farther with the walker, eventually graduating to a cane for short distances. The media attention intensified. When a national morning show requested an interview, after some hesitation, James agreed, partly because they offered to send a crew to his home rather than requiring travel. "We can always say no if it gets to be too much," Sarah reminded him. "Your recovery comes first." The morning of the interview, Emma arrived early to help prepare Max, who was still easily startled by strangers. She found James dressed in his nicest sweater, looking nervous but determined. "They want to talk about loyalty and the human-animal bond," he explained as they waited for the crew. "I figured if our story helps people understand that connection better, maybe it's worth sharing." The interview, conducted by a sympathetic reporter named Claire, was gentle and thoughtful. She sat on the floor to be at Max's level, allowing him to approach at his own pace. Her questions explored the depth of their bond without sensationalizing their ordeal. "What was it like," she asked James, "to know Max was waiting for you, refusing food, while you were unconscious?" James considered this, his hand resting on Max's head. "I didn't know, not consciously. During the coma, But afterward, when Sarah told me what was happening, he paused, emotion momentarily overwhelming him. It was terrifying and humbling to be loved that completely, that unconditionally. Max, sensing James's distress, pressed closer against his leg. The camera captured the moment, the dog's instinctive comfort, James's grateful response. It was a visual testament to their connection, more powerful than any words could convey. When the segment aired the following week, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with reactions, the hashtag Max and James trending. Nationally, celebrities shared the story, adding their own reflections on animal companions. Animal welfare organizations reported spikes in adoption inquiries and donations. "You've started something bigger than yourselves," Emma told James during her next visit. "People are really connecting with your journey." James nodded, looking slightly embarrassed by the attention. "I keep telling everyone that Max is the hero of the story. I just showed up at the end." But others saw it differently. The Riverside Gazette ran a follow-up piece, focusing on James's decision to leave rehabilitation despite medical advice. "Sometimes, love outweighs protocol." One doctor was quoted saying, "In rare cases, emotional healing enables physical recovery in ways our medical models don't fully account for." This perspective resonated with many readers. Emails poured into the newspaper from people sharing stories of healing enhanced by animal companionship, cancer patients comforted by faithful pets, trauma survivors anchored by animal connections, elderly individuals finding purpose in caring for devoted companions. España interest in their story grew. Unexpected opportunities emerged. A well-known pet food company contacted James about featuring Max in an advertising campaign centered on nutrition for recovering animals. A children's book author asked permission to create a story based on their experience. A documentary filmmaker proposed a short film about their journey. James approached these offers with caution, consulting with Sarah and Emma before making decisions. "I don't want to exploit what happened," he explained. "But if sharing our story helps other people understand the bond between humans and animals, maybe that's worthwhile." He ultimately declined most commercial opportunities, but agreed to participate in educational initiatives. When Riverside Animal Shelter proposed creating a special fund in Max's name to support medical care for animals separated from owners due to hospitalization or other emergencies, James enthusiastically endorsed the idea. The Max Fund, as it became known, quickly raised over $50,000 through community donations. The shelter used these resources to establish protocols for animals in situations similar to Max's, providing enhanced care, maintaining connections to absent owners through sent items and recordings, and even facilitating video calls when possible. "Your experience is changing how we approach these cases," Emma told James during a check-in visit 6 weeks after the reunion. "We've already had 2 situations where owners were temporarily hospitalized, and we're using everything we learned from Max to help their pets cope." One particularly meaningful connection came through an email from a military family. Their son, deployed overseas, had left his dog with his parents. The dog had stopped eating after his departure and was showing signs of depression similar to Max's. "Would James be willing to talk to our son about how he maintained his connection with Max during their separation?" the mother asked. "We're trying everything, but Samson is still declining." James agreed immediately, speaking with the young soldier via video call, sharing the letters he had written to Max and suggesting ways to maintain connection across distance. 2 weeks later, the family sent a photo of Samson eating normally, again, responding to recordings and sent items from his person. Emma had always loved her work at Riverside Shelter, finding purpose in matching animals with forever homes and providing care to those waiting for their chance. But Max's case had affected her deeply, transforming her perspective on animal welfare in ways she was still processing. "You've gone above and beyond for this dog," Corey observed one afternoon, finding Emma researching canine grief responses during her lunch break. "I've never seen you this invested in a case before." Emma looked up from her computer, considering the observation. "Max showed me something I didn't fully understand before," she admitted. "The depth of attachment animals can form, how profoundly they experience separation. It's made me think about how we approach these cases." That evening, unable to let go of these thoughts, Emma began drafting notes for what she initially considered a shelter protocol document. How could they better identify animals experiencing separation grief? What interventions might help? How could they maintain connections between animals and absent owners? What began as bullet points soon expanded into pages of ideas, research citations, and proposed guidelines. Emma worked late into the night, energized by the sense that Max's experience could potentially help countless other animals facing similar circumstances. The following week, during a scheduled visit to check on Max's progress, Emma shared her developing ideas with James. "I keep thinking about how many animals might be in Max's situation, separated from owners who fully intend to return but can't communicate that to their pets," she explained as they watched Max contentedly chewing a toy nearby. "What if shelters had better protocols for these cases?" James listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When I was in the hospital, knowing Max was waiting, it was agonizing. I would have given anything for someone to tell him I was coming back, to help him understand. Exactly, Emma said, her passion evident. That's the gap I want to address. Not just the physical care, which most shelters manage well, but the emotional support for animals experiencing ambiguous loss. Their conversation continued for hours. James sharing insights from his perspective as Max's person, Emma contributing her professional knowledge of shelter operations. By the time she left, her initial notes had evolved into something more framework for what they began calling the waiting protocol. Over the next month, Emma refined the concept through conversations with Dr. Miller, research into animal cognition, and consultations with behaviorists. Specializing in separation anxiety, she discovered scattered initiatives around the country, addressing aspects of the issue, but no comprehensive approach. You might be onto something significant here, Dr. Miller told her after reviewing her draft. This fills a real gap in shelter medicine. With his encouragement, Emma approached Corey about implementing elements of the protocol at Riverside. To her delight, he was immediately supportive. After seeing Max's case, how could we not, he said. Let's pilot it and document the results. The opportunity to test the approach came sooner than expected. An elderly man named Walter was hospitalized with pneumonia. His corgi, Pepper, brought to Riverside when no family members could immediately take her. Following Emma's protocol, the staff collected detailed information about Pepper's routine, gathered items carrying Walter's scent, and arranged for his granddaughter to record messages that were played for Pepper several times daily. The results were encouraging. Though Pepper showed signs of stress, she maintained her appetite and responsiveness, a stark contrast to Max's rapid decline. When Walter was discharged 2 weeks later, their reunion was joyful but not desperate a success. By any measure, it's working, Emma told James during a visit, showing him photos of Walter and Pepper's reunion. We've had 3 cases now, and each one has shown better outcomes than we typically see with owner surrenders. James smiled, watching Max doze peacefully beside him, their days of crisis now fading into memory. He'd be proud to know his suffering wasn't for nothing, he said, scratching behind Max's ears. Wouldn't you, buddy? Max's tail thumped contentedly against the couch cushions, his recovery now nearly complete. His weight had returned to normal, his coat regained its shine, and though he still maintained closer than average proximity to James, his separation anxiety had diminished to manageable levels. James's recovery continued as well, his progress steady, if slower than Max's. He had graduated from the walker to a cane, which he now used only for longer outings. The physical therapist who visited 3 times weekly reported consistent improvement in his strength and balance. I was thinking, James said as Emma prepared to leave, would it help if I came to the shelter sometime to talk with your staff about the owner's perspective? It might give them insights they could use with other cases. Emma's face lit up. That would be incredible. Actually, She hesitated, then plunged ahead. I've been invited to present the waiting protocol at a regional animal welfare conference next month. Would you consider joining me? Sharing your and Max's story as a case study? The invitation marked a turning point, expanding Emma's vision, from a shelter-specific protocol to something with potentially broader impact. James's agreement to participate, bringing the owner's perspective, added crucial depth to the presentation. In the weeks leading to the conference, Emma refined her materials, incorporating feedback from colleagues and the experiences of several more reunion cases. James prepared his part of the presentation, articulating the emotional journey he'd experienced during their separation and the profound impact of their reunion. Should I bring Max? He asked during their final planning session. Emma considered. Having him there would be powerful, she admitted. But conferences can be stressful environments for dogs. What matters most is what's good for Max. After careful thought, they decided Max would attend only the presentation itself, with Sarah waiting nearby to take him home immediately afterward, minimizing his stress while still allowing attendees to witness the bond that had inspired the protocol. The day of the conference arrived with nervous anticipation. Emma had presented at professional events before, but never with such personal investment in the material. James, despite his experience with media interviews about their story, found the prospect of addressing animal welfare professionals particularly meaningful. These are the people who can actually implement changes, he noted as they prepared backstage. It feels important to get this right. Max, sensing their tension, stayed close to James, occasionally nudging his hand for reassurance. Dressed in a vest identifying him as a program participant rather than a service dog, he drew admiring glances from passing attendees. When their session was announced, Emma led the way to the stage, James following with Max at his side. The audience of about 200 shelter workers, veterinarians, and animal welfare advocates watched with immediate interest, many clearly recognizing them from media coverage. Emma began with the clinical aspects, presenting data on separation, responses in animals, and explaining the core elements of the waiting protocol. She shared slides of the dedicated waiting spaces Riverside had created, the documentation systems they'd developed, and the results from their initial cases. Then, James took the microphone, Max sitting calmly at his feet. His account was deeply personal: the accident, the coma, the desperate concern for Max upon waking. He described writing letters to a dog who couldn't read, recording messages for ears that recognized his voice, the agony of separation without the ability to explain or reassure. The most haunting part, he said, his voice steady despite the emotional content, was knowing that Max had already experienced abandonment before I adopted him. He had no way of understanding that this time was different, that I was fighting to come back to him. The room was utterly silent. The audience, captivated by this perspective rarely articulated in professional settings, focused on animal care. Max, perhaps sensing the emotional weight of the moment, pressed closer against James's leg. What Emma's protocol offers, James continued, is a bridge across that gap of understanding. It can't eliminate the pain of separation, but it provides connection, continuity, and hope for the animals and for the people who love them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. When the formal presentation ended, attendees lined up to ask questions, share similar cases from their shelters, and offer suggestions for expanding the protocol. Several shelter directors expressed interest in implementing the approach immediately. "You've identified a blind spot in our field," said Dr. Alina Martinez, a veterinary behaviorist from a major urban shelter. "We focus so much on animals permanently surrendered that we've neglected these temporary separations. I'd like to collaborate on developing this further." By the end of the conference, Emma had collected contact information from professionals across 3 states interested in piloting the protocol. What had begun as one shelter worker's response to one dog's suffering was evolving into a movement, with potential to transform practices nationwide. "I never expected this," Emma told James as they said goodbye in the parking lot. Max already settled in Sarah's car for the ride home. "I just wanted to help Max." Autumn arrived with gentle persistence, transforming the city park where James and Max now walked daily. Their pace had increased gradually over the months, James's dependence on the cane diminishing as his strength returned. Max trotted beside him, his once skeletal frame now robust again, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through gold and crimson leaves. "Looking good, you too," called Mrs. Chen from her bench, where she sat each day with her elderly poodle. She had witnessed their progress from those first tentative outings, James unsteady with his walker, Max still gaunt from his ordeal, to their current steady rhythm. James waved, smiling. Their route through the park had become a community of sorts. Regular faces who had followed their journey either through the media coverage or simply by watching their daily progress. The hot dog vendor who always saved a small plain sausage for Max. The retired teacher who tracked their increasing distance with quiet encouragement. The young mother who had told James that reading about Max to her children had helped them understand their grandfather's extended hospital stay. "Beautiful day," James commented as they passed Mrs. Chen. "Sophie feeling better. Much better, thank you. That joint supplement you recommended is helping." These conversations, brief but genuine, marked another kind of healing. James's gradual re-engagement with the world beyond his apartment, beyond his medical appointments, beyond the focused intensity of his and Max's mutual recovery. 6 months had passed since their reunion. 6 months of gradual rebuilding, physically and emotionally. The viral attention had faded, as internet phenomena inevitably do, allowing them to reclaim the privacy of ordinary life, while retaining the connections that mattered. Emma remained one of those important connections, though her visits had naturally decreased as Max's health stabilized. She had accepted the foundation position, launching the waiting protocol as a national initiative with James and Max as its inspiration and occasional ambassadors. Her updates about shelters implementing the protocol and animals successfully reunited with their owners brought a sense of meaning to what had been, at its core, a painful experience. 2 more successful cases last week, she had texted the previous day. A military deployment and a hospitalization. Both dogs maintained weight and healthy behavior during separation. "Your suffering wasn't in vain, Max." At the far side of the park, James and Max paused at their usual bench. This moment of rest had been necessary at first, when James's stamina was still compromised. Now it was simply a pleasant ritual, a chance to observe the world around them, and appreciate how far they had come. 6 months ago, I couldn't walk half this distance, James remarked to Max, who sat attentively beside the bench, his gaze rarely leaving James's face. "And you were still eating from my hand. One tiny bite at a time." Max's tail swept the ground in response, his expression containing that particular quality of focused adoration that had sustained him through their separation. The rehabilitation journey had not been linear for either of them. James had experienced setback days when the traumatic brain injury manifested in headaches or cognitive fog, weeks when progress plateaued frustratingly. Max had developed occasional stress behaviors, especially when James was out of sight for too long, the echo of their separation triggering anxiety that required patient reassurance. but the trajectory had been steadily upward, each supporting the other through the difficult moments. James's physical therapist had commented on the phenomenon, noting how Max's presence seemed to enhance James's determination during challenging exercises. He's not just emotional support, she had observed. He's actually improving your neural outcomes. The focus you maintain when working with him engages different pathways. We're seeing it more and more in rehabilitation medicine. James's neurologist had been similarly impressed during a recent follow-up appointment. Your recovery exceeds our projections, he had noted, reviewing the latest scan results. Cognitively and physically, you're outpacing the standard trajectory. For your injury type, when James had mentioned Max's role in his recovery, the doctor had nodded thoughtfully. The research on animal-assisted therapy is still emerging, but what we're seeing is compelling. The neurochemical benefits of those bonds can be significant. Your case might be worth documenting formally. This suggestion had led to James and Max participating in a research study at the University Medical Center, where scientists were exploring the impact of human-animal bonds on neurological recovery. Twice monthly, they visited the lab for cognitive testing, physical assessments, and monitoring of their interactions. The synchronization of your stress responses is remarkable, the lead researcher had explained, showing James the data from their monitoring devices. When you experience anxiety, Max's physiological markers change in parallel, and when he provides comfort, 1 year to the day after the accident, James stood in his kitchen making coffee, watching the morning light illuminate the city beyond his window. Max lay nearby on his bed, not sleeping but resting, his eyes tracking James's movements with the relaxed vigilance that had become their new normal. The anniversary had arrived with surprising gentleness. James had anticipated difficulty, emotional echoes of trauma, perhaps, or anxiety as the date approached. Instead, he found himself filled with a quiet gratitude that defied the calendar's significance. They had survived, they had healed, they had transformed suffering into something meaningful. His phone chimed with a text message from Emma, thinking of you both today. Coffee later. James smiled. Emma had remembered, of course. Though her new role with the foundation kept her busy, their friendship had deepened over the months, evolving beyond Max's care into something valuable for its own sake. Absolutely, he replied. Our usual place at 2. The usual place was a dog-friendly cafe near the park where they met every couple of weeks to catch up. Emma would bring updates about the waiting protocol's implementation, sharing stories of successful reunions, and showing photos of dogs who had benefited from the approach Max's case had inspired. James would contribute insights from their participation in the research study, which had expanded to include other owner-pet pairs with similar experiences. As he finished his coffee, James's phone rang. Sarah, calling from Seattle. Their weekly check-ins had continued despite the distance, their bond strengthened by the crisis they had weathered together. Happy normal day, she said when he answered, their private code for acknowledging the anniversary without emphasizing its traumatic aspects. Happy normal day, he echoed, smiling. How's the new project going? They chatted easily about Sarah's work, her new apartment, her tentative relationship with a colleague. The conversation meandered to James's graphic design business, which had fully rebounded as his cognitive function returned to normal, and to Max's recent checkup with the vet, who had pronounced him in excellent health. I was thinking, Sarah said as their call wound down, maybe I could visit next month. I have some vacation time coming up. We'd love that, James replied without hesitation. Max would be thrilled to see his favorite aunt. After ending the call, James gathered Max's leash for their morning walk. These daily outings had become more than exercise or routine. They were a celebration of recovery, of mobility reclaimed, of life continuing despite the interruption that might have ended. Today's route took them past the rehabilitation center where James had spent those difficult weeks after waking from the coma. He paused outside, studying the building with a complex mixture of emotions. Within those walls, he had relearned basic skills: walking, balancing, the fine motor control needed for everyday tasks. He had also made the decision that defined the past year, choosing Max's survival over medical caution. We came a long way from here, didn't we? He said to Max, who sat patiently beside him, seemingly understanding the significance of the location. A familiar voice called from the entrance. James. Max, is that you? Dr. Eliza Ramirez, the rehabilitation specialist who had overseen James's care, approached with a broad smile. I was just thinking about you too. Today's the anniversary, isn't it? James nodded, accepting her brief hug. 1 year exactly. We were just taking a moment to reflect, I guess. Dr. Ramirez crouched to greet Max, who remembered her with evident pleasure, his tail wagging as she scratched behind his ears. I use your story with patients all the time, you know, she told James as she straightened. Not to encourage leaving, against medical advice of course, but to illustrate the power of motivation and recovery. They chatted for a few minutes, James updating her on their progress. Before they parted, Dr. Ramirez looked at him with professional assessment. You've made a remarkable recovery, James. Physically, cognitively, it's exceptional given the severity of your injuries. I had exceptional motivation, James replied, glancing down at Max. Dr. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. The medical literature is full of unexpected recoveries, driven by love, parents fighting to stay alive for their children, spouses rallying against terminal prognoses. But you're the first case I've seen where the bond with an animal produced such dramatic results. She smiled. You've changed how I think about rehabilitation, how I talk to my patients about their support systems. This conversation lingered in James's mind as they continued their walk, winding through the neighborhood toward the park. Every step represented victory over the injuries that might have left him permanently disabled. Every moment of clarity, a triumph over the brain trauma that could have permanently altered his cognition. The park was busy with morning activity circling the path, parents with strollers enjoying the mild weather, other dog walkers exchanging greetings as they passed. James and Max had become familiar figures here, their regular presence marking the passage of seasons and the progression of healing. Bennett called a booming voice as they approached their usual rest spot. Martin Green, a retired firefighter, who walked his Labrador at the same time most mornings, waved them over. The man of the hour. Saw your segment on the news this morning. James looked puzzled. News segment. Martin nodded vigorously. Channel 5 did a follow-up on your story, 1-year anniversary, talking about that protocol thing your friend developed. They showed footage from that interview you did when you were both still looking pretty rough. He gestured to Max. This guy's come a long way since then. You both have. James hadn't been aware of any media coverage planned for the anniversary, but he wasn't entirely surprised. Their story had resonated deeply with people, the themes of loyalty and reunion striking universal chords. Occasionally, the public interest resurged when the waiting protocol achieved a particularly noteworthy success, or when a similar story emerged elsewhere. I didn't know about that, James admitted. We've been trying to maintain a lower profile these days. Martin chuckled. Good luck with that. Your stories become part of local lore. My grandson did a school project on it last month. Heroes in our community was the theme. The idea of being considered heroes still felt strange to James. He and Max had simply done what their bond demanded, James fighting to return. Max, waiting with unshakable faith. Nothing heroic about it, just love expressing itself in the face of separation. After parting from Martin, they completed their circuit of the park and headed home. The morning's encounters, Emma's text, Sarah's call, Dr. Ramirez's reflection, Martin's news about the media coverage, had created a sense of the anniversary as not just a marker of trauma, but a celebration of the healing and meaning that had emerged from it. Back in the apartment, James settled at his desk to work on a design project while Max napped nearby. The rhythm of their days had found a new equilibrium, not exactly the same as before the accident, but rich with appreciation for ordinary moments that might once have passed unnoticed. At lunchtime, James's phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. With the local area code, typically cautious about unknown callers, he nearly let it go to voicemail, but something prompted him to answer. Is this James Bennett? Asked a woman's voice, hesitant but determined. Yes, this is James. My name is Karen Miller. I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I saw the news piece about you and your dog this morning, about the anniversary. She paused, seeming to gather courage. My husband is in the hospital. Stroke. It happened 3 weeks ago. Our dog Bailey, she stopped eating just like your Max did. The shelter called yesterday saying they're concerned. James listened as Karen's story emerged and fragments her husband's sudden collapse. The scramble to find temporary care for their dog when it became clear his hospitalization would be extended. Her inability to take Bailey herself due to hospital visitation restrictions during her husband's critical care. I know this is presumptuous, Karen continued, but the news mentioned your friend, the one who developed that protocol for dogs separated from owners. I wondered if it's any way she could help Bailey. The shelter's doing their best, but they've never dealt with this before. James felt a surge of purpose, the familiar sense of meaning that had emerged from his and Max's ordeal. Her name is Emma Carlson. She works with the Waiting Protocol Foundation now, and helping dogs like Bailey is exactly what they do. He took down Karen's information, promising to connect her with Emma immediately. After the call, James texted Emma, possible case for the protocol. Owner just called me. Can I give her your contact info? Emma's response came quickly. Absolutely. Send details. See you at 2. As James prepared for their coffee meeting, gathering the small gift he'd purchased to mark the anniversary of their first meeting, he reflected on how their painful journey had created ripples of positive change. Karen's call was just the latest example, their story continuing to reach people in need, offering hope and practical solutions born from their experience. Bon Max, sensing they were about to go out again, appeared at James's side, his leash in his mouth, the behavior that had emerged during recovery, his way of communicating readiness for their next adventure together. Just a minute, buddy, James told him, bending to take the leash. We're meeting Emma, remember? Spring sunshine filtered through the large windows of Riverside Shelter's newly renovated community room, illuminating the gathering of people and dogs assembled for a special occasion. Colorful banners decorated the walls, proclaiming Waiting Protocol, 2 years of reunions and celebrating the Max Fund. James stood near the podium, Max at his side, watching as shelter staff arranged the final details for the ceremony. 2 years had passed since their reunion, 18 months since. Emma had launched the waiting protocol as a national initiative. Today marked the official opening of Riverside's dedicated waiting ward, a specialized space designed specifically for animals temporarily separated from their owners. Nervous? Emma asked, joining them with a clipboard in hand. James smiled. A little public speaking isn't really my thing. Max, on the other hand, loves an audience. As if understanding, Max wagged his tail, his demeanor relaxed and confident. At 9 years old, he had fully recovered from his ordeal, his coat glossy, his frame robust, his eyes bright with the intelligence and devotion that had sustained him through their separation. He's the real star anyway, Emma assured James. People are here to see the dog who inspired it all. The community room gradually filled with an eclectic mix of attendees, shelter volunteers, veterinary professionals, representatives from animal welfare organizations, local media, and families whose pets had benefited from the waiting protocol. James recognized many familiar faces, including Dr. Milner, who had treated Max during his crisis, and Corey, still managing Riverside Shelter with the same practical compassion. Most meaningful were the reunited pairs, humans and animals, who had experienced separation and reunion through the protocol's intervention. Bailey, the dog whose owner had called James on the anniversary, attended with both Karen and her husband Robert, now recovered from his stroke. A cat named Jasper perched in his carrier beside an elderly woman who had spent 2 months in rehabilitation after a fall. A young military family stood with their shepherd Mix, who had maintained his health during a 6-month deployment thanks to the protocol's support. Quite a legacy, Sarah commented, appearing at James's side. She had flown in from Seattle specifically for the event, her presence adding to the day's significance. James nodded, watching as more people arrived. Never could have imagined this 2 years ago. The ceremony began with Corey welcoming the attendees and explaining the purpose of the gathering to celebrate the official opening of the waiting ward and to recognize the impact of the waiting protocol on animal welfare nationwide. Emma spoke next, providing statistics that illustrated the protocol's success. Over 300 animals had been supported through temporary separations from their owners. With a 94% rate of successful reunions, 42 shelters across the country had implemented the approach, with more joining each month. But statistics don't tell the real story, she concluded. For that, we need to return to where it all began, with one dog who refused to give up, and one man who understood what that loyalty demanded. She gestured toward James and Max. I'm honored to introduce James, Bennett, and Max, whose journey inspired everything we're celebrating today. As James approached the podium, Max walking perfectly beside him, he felt a momentary surge of anxiety. Public speaking had never been his strength, and even after numerous interviews and appearances related to the protocol, he still found it challenging. But as he looked out at the assembled faces, people whose lives had been touched by the story he was about to share, he found his voice. 2 years ago, he began, Max and I experienced a separation that nearly cost both our lives. A car accident left me in a coma, unable to explain to Max why I had suddenly disappeared from his world. Max, who had already experienced abandonment before I adopted him, found himself in a shelter with no understanding of whether I would ever return. He recounted their story with simple honesty: Max's refusal to eat, his own awakening and desperate concern upon learning of Max's condition, the decision to leave rehabilitation against medical advice, and their emotional reunion. What happened to us was not unique, James continued. Separations occur every day due to hospitalizations, military deployments, housing emergencies, and countless other circumstances. What makes our story significant isn't its rarity, but what Emma and the team here at Riverside recognized, that with the right support, these separations don't have to end in tragedy. Max sat attentively throughout James's speech, occasionally scanning the audience as if assessing their response, his presence a living testament to the bond being described. The waiting protocol isn't complicated, James explained. It's about maintaining connection across separation through scent, through voice recordings, through routines and familiar objects. It's about understanding that animals experience loss and grief in ways more profound than we often acknowledge, and that they deserve support through those experiences. He gestured toward the families whose pets had benefited from the protocol. Every successful reunion represents not just an animal saved from unnecessary suffering, but a human-animal bond preserved. That preservation matters not just for the emotional well-being of those involved, but for the tangible health benefits these connections provide to both species. As James concluded his remarks, he felt a sense of completion as if in sharing their story yet again. He and Max were fulfilling the purpose that had emerged from their suffering. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, reflecting not just appreciation appreciation for his words, but recognition of the journey they represented. The formal ceremony continued with the ribbon cutting for the waiting ward, a tour of the specialized facility, and a reception where attendees could mingle and share their experiences. Throughout it all, Max remained a center of attention, accepting gentle greetings from those who recognized him from media coverage or had been touched by his story. "He's a natural ambassador," Dr. Miller observed, watching as Max patiently allowed a child to pet him. "Hard to believe this is the same dog who was at death's door 2 years ago." James nodded, reflecting on the transformation. "Sometimes I think about that day finding him in the medical room. So weak he could barely lift his head. Now look at him." The waiting ward itself stood as physical testament to Max's Lagusha, thoughtfully designed space where animals separated from their owners could receive specialized care. Sound-dampening materials reduced stress-inducing noise. Individual waiting suites provided private spaces where each animal could be surrounded by familiar scents and possessions. A dedicated recording studio allowed family members to create voice messages for their waiting pets. Most importantly, trained staff understood the emotional components of separation and provided appropriate support. "We've incorporated everything we learned from Max's case and all the others that followed," Emma explained as she led tour groups through the facility. "The physical elements matter, of course, but equally important is the understanding that these animals aren't just homeless, they're waiting for someone specific to return." As the event wound down, James found himself in conversation with Karen and Robert Miller, whose dog Bailey had been one of the first to benefit from the protocol. After Max, "We can never thank you enough," Karen said, her hand resting on Bailey's head. "If you hadn't shared your story, if Emma hadn't developed the protocol," she left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Robert, still showing signs of his stroke in a slight facial droop and careful speech, added his perspective. "Knowing Bailey was okay, that she understood I was coming back, it made a difference in my recovery, gave me something to fight for." These conversations continued throughout the afternoon, stories of separation and reunion, of bonds preserved through crisis, of healing made possible by connection. Each account affirmed the value of what had emerged from Max's suffering and James's determination, the ripples of their experience expanding far beyond their personal journey. As the event concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Emma joined James, Sarah, and Max in a quiet corner of the room. The book publication date is set, she informed them, referring to the volume she had written documenting the development and implementation of the waiting protocol. The publisher wants to do a small tour 5 cities, focusing on places with protocol participating shelters. James and Sarah exchanged glances. "Road trip," Sarah suggested with a smile. "Maybe," James replied, looking down at Max. "What do you think, buddy? Ready for a new adventure?" Max's tail wagged decisively, as if understanding the question perfectly. Emma laughed. "I'll take that as a yes. We'll work out the details next week." As they gathered their things to leave, a young shelter volunteer approached hesitantly, holding something in her hands. "Mr. Bennett, I made this for Max, to thank him for helping so many animals like my cat. She was in the protocol last year. When I was hospitalized, she held out a handmade dog bandana, embroidered with paw prints and the words 'Waiting hearts find their way home.' The phrase from the tags Emma had given them on their first anniversary." James accepted the gift with genuine appreciation, kneeling to tie it around Max's neck. "It's perfect. Thank you for thinking of him."